everyone. Thanks for joining us today. We have the opportunity today to interview Roxy and Sarah, and they have written a fabulous workbook together, the Antiracist Heart, Self-Compassion and Activism Handbook. And I'm so excited to talk to them about that today. First, I'm going to introduce them a little bit. Roxy is a clinical psychologist and certified Center for the Nonviolent Communication trainer. With decades of experience, she has worked and consulted and provided training across the U.S. with businesses, nonprofits, and even government organizations, as well as internationally in over 10 countries. She also works as a psychologist in San Francisco, serving the homeless and disenfranchised mentally ill population. And she's also the author of How to Have Anti-Racist Conversations, Embracing Our Full Humanity to Challenge White Supremacy. And we get to talk to Sarah Peyton, who is also a certified trainer of nonviolent communication, as well as a neuroscience educator. She likes to integrate brain science and the use of resonant language to awaken and sustain self-compassion, particularly in the face of such difficult issues like self-condemnation, self-disgust, and self-sabotage. She teaches and lectures internationally and is the author of Your Resonant Self book, the book series. So today we're going to talk just a little bit about having anti-racist conversations with your kids, particularly in light of this culture where we have book bans going on in school, and it's always a sensitive topic, but I feel like especially right now, parents are concerned and don't know how to address this with their kids appropriately. So to start, I just want to ask you guys just to tell us, just in your own words, a little bit about this workbook that you have written.
Well, my interest with the workbook and Roxy's as well was like, how do we bring self-compassion? And then once we bring self-compassion to this interestingly difficult question, which is difficult in different ways for different groups. If you're white, it's difficult because you're worried you're going to make a mistake or offend somebody. And if you're of the global majority, which is a wonderful phrase that Roxy discovered and I'll let her speak about, then it might be just difficult because it's just exhausting to be up against it all the time. Because so much that happens at an unconscious level. We're seeing so much happen consciously right now. Whew, terrifying. And we're seeing, and then there's all the implicit stuff that we have gotten to start to work on.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Do you want to add anything to that, Roxy?
I think part of it is really also noticing how many people are also horrified by the things that are happening and tell us, like, I want to do something, I want to intervene, I want to create change, and I feel frozen. Like I have all of these ideas of how to do these things, but I don't know how to integrate them, and I don't understand why I'm having this block when I see harm happening that prevents me from speaking up and saying, hey, that's not okay.
Yeah.
So we wanted to help support people in moving past those blocks.
I love that. I love that. Let's start with opening up a conversation about race with, so I'm a preschool teacher, preschool and kindergarten level. What are some tips and things you would say to parents at that level? Because we know, I'll introduce it this way. I know as a preschool educator that if kids are young enough to experience it, they're old enough to experience it, they're old enough to talk about it. And I have, particularly, I'm a foster mom, so my babies all come from trauma and are multiracial. And so if they are old enough to have experienced that trauma, they're old enough to talk about it in appropriate ways. So can you talk a little bit about how you would suggest, what tips you have for parents of that younger age group?
So first, I just really want to celebrate what you just said, because part of the backlash that we're seeing nowadays with people saying it's hurting children to talk about these
Yeah.
things. And
Mm-hmm.
whenever I hear that, I wonder, like, who exactly are you talking about? Because I
Mm-hmm.
guarantee you that it's hurting children to experience these things. And it hurts
Yes.
all of us if we don't have a way to talk about and make sense of these things that we
Mm-hmm.
see happening, even if they're not happening directly to us. So thank you for naming it.
Absolutely.
And then one of the things that I think is really helpful for parents of little ones to know is to just start normalizing the conversation. I see a
Mm-hmm.
lot of parents saying, my child was walking down the street and they said, "Oh, mommy, look, that person's really dark, right?
Mm-hmm.
Really black." And the parents react with horror. "Don't say that, don't say that."
Yes.
And we send this message that this conversation is not normal. Why would I
Mm-hmm.
be any less curious about somebody whose skin is a different color than mine than I would
Mm-hmm.
be about somebody whose hair is a different color, whose eyes are different color? So let's
Absolutely.
normalize and make diversity a normal, accepted part of the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Language that talks about difference, it's not
Mm-hmm.
about not using it, it's about using it appropriately, using it in
Yes.
ways that are not highlighting negative qualities, that are
Mm-hmm.
really celebrating the shared qualities that we all have. So
Mm-hmm.
that's one of my first tips is to start normalizing saying,
Mm-hmm.
yes, here's somebody who has darker skin than we do, or here's somebody who has lighter skin than we do.
Absolutely. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Some other things I would suggest are to notice when your children start to make comments.
Mm-hmm.
Even kids as young as 3 have internalized a lot of the stereotypes.
Yeah.
5 to 7, we've internalized a lot of gender stereotypes. And
Yes.
so when children say something, if a child says, "I don't want to play with her because she's a girl,"
Mm-hmm.
stop and say, "Hey, let's talk about that for a minute." And one
Mm-hmm.
of my first tips is to don't shame your child. Don't make it so painful for them to make a mistake about this that they are now terrified to ask you questions or to even hear your feedback
Absolutely.
about the things that are happening.
Yes.
When you have the conversation, make sure that you start with curiosity. And especially when I say this, I say do this if that child who's harmed is not present. If the child
Yes.
who's harmed is present, take care of that child. Say,
Mm-hmm.
of course we want to include you. Come on over here and, let them
Mm-hmm.
know that this is a value that you have. But when you get
Mm-hmm.
your child alone, just find out what was going on for them.
Mm-hmm.
Usually, when children say something like this, it's their best strategy to express some sort of frustration or maybe some discomfort they have with maybe how that child shows up. And
Mm-hmm.
so we can help them start to say, "Oh, she doesn't share really well," versus "I don't like her because she's a girl," right? So
Yes.
help them have the language that really um, specifies what the issue is rather than
Mm-hmm.
going to these very easy global stereotypes that they see mirrored all of the
Mm-hmm.
time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I agree with that. Shaming and pushing off the conversation makes it bigger and worse and scarier for them. Mm-hmm.
And noticing, like, just in general, noticing when things are happening, like
Mm-hmm.
if something happens on TV, or noticing if something happens on the street, or noticing if something happens in a store. And
Mm-hmm.
even if it's not happening directly to our child, to be able
Mm-hmm.
to talk about it and to say,
Mm-hmm.
oh, to make this. I was thinking about your beautiful questions for our interview today. And I was thinking about how so often our children internalize the very best of our values,
Mm-hmm.
and, and take them into the world. And then sometimes we're scared and we're like, no,
Mm-hmm.
don't have that big of a value. You got to tone it down so
Mm-hmm.
that you're safe. But I
Mm-hmm.
think there's something about really in enjoying the bigness of our own love and enjoying the love that our children have, where they want the world to be more equitable and more,
Mm-hmm.
and 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 celebrating that because they're picking it up from us too.
Yes. Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. They are.
I add something to that because you just reminded me, Sarah. I remember when my children were young, I had 3 children,
Mm-hmm.
and we would maybe walk down the street in San Francisco and we would see some homeless folks.
Mm-hmm.
And my son especially would always say, "We have to stop. We have to do something. We have to give them food. We have to take care of them," right?
Mm-hmm.
And that was challenging for me because I was also both of the, oh, I'm worried about safety. I'm worried about just
Yes.
even how much resources I have to contribute. So
Yes.
many stories inside of my head. And instead
Yes.
of having a conversation with my child around, here's why I'm not wanting to stop today, and here's
Mm-hmm.
how we can contribute, and here's the ways that we can support. We would also just say, oh, no, no, let's move away. Let's not
Push
do
it
that.
off. Mm-hmm.
Exactly. So even being able to really celebrate that impetus that
Mm-hmm.
children have to contribute to other people, to support other people,
Mm-hmm.
not shaming them about it, not making it wrong. And
Yeah.
then if there's a reason that we have for not wanting to support them in following through on those actions, make that really clear.
Mm-hmm.
Explain what's going on for us so that they're brought into it and we can support their understanding.
Absolutely. And especially at this age level, when we're talking about this younger age group, it doesn't have to be complicated. You don't have to have all the answers to satisfy
Mhm.
what they want to know. It can just be very basic, simple answers, like like you just gave the example of with the homeless population. This is why we can't today, but let's think of something together that we can do in the future.
Yes.
That's a fantastic example of that. Um, and I'll say, I had a child the other day ask, why is my skin darker than his skin? And, we didn't have to have a 30-minute conversation about it for her to be satisfied. We just talked about, some people's skin are darker than others, and some people's skin are lighter. And there's this thing called melanin, and he has more of it than you do. And that makes his skin a little darker than yours. Isn't that cool? And
Yeah.
she was like, oh, neat. And, I asked her if she could say that word, and she's very young, so she couldn't. And it was adorable how she pronounced it. And I was like, yep, that's it. And we just moved along. It was a very simple conversation. And they pick up on our fear, right?
Yes.
Especially at this age, or our anxieties. And so it's very okay to say, I don't know, let's talk about that. Let's pick that back up later, too, if you need a minute to think about how to respond.
I also want to add that what's really important to me is that we're
Mhm.
actually saying something,
Yes.
because a lot of parents, go to the, I'm just not going to talk about it. Let's talk about it later, but
Hmm.
we never come back to it. And what we're basically doing is we're basically throwing our little babies into the
Yes.
wild and saying, I'm not going to help you make sense of this. So you have to make sense of it from all the information that's out there. All
Yes.
the information that's out there is pretty toxic. They're
Yes.
seeing all of these
There's a lot.
stereotypes.
Yes.
Exactly. So we
Yes.
need to actively be part of helping them make sense of their world so that
Hmm.
they understand the messages and the meaning we want them to have and
Hmm.
not have to draw conclusions from some of the
Hmm.
media that's out there.
Hmm. And like you said before, like, kids are already forming those opinions, and especially about gender and racial stereotypes, very young. And we review books and movies, and one of the things I did a couple weeks ago was do an audit of my kids' bookshelves. And it amazed me. I have been trying so hard for my daughter's bookshelf to make sure she had strong female centered books on her bookshelf all year long. And it amazed me that still over 50% of the books were male. And then they weren't as diverse as I wanted them to be either. And diversity in children's books looks a little different than diversity in even middle school and adult books. But, and people scoff when I say that even animal books can be racist, right? But if you
Yeah.
have a character that the darker dog is always the villain, that's a problem, right? And those messages are internalized. So so being intentional in our conversations and being intentional with what our kids are exposed to, and just being aware of some of the things our kids are exposed to too,
Mhm.
like what shows they're watching and stuff. I am just thrilled by the availability of programming right now for preschoolers
Mhm.
that is more diverse and inclusive. One of my daughter's favorite shows right now is a hero show on Netflix that has a kiddo in a wheelchair as one of the main superheroes, and I think that's fantastic.
I know the show. I love that show. And
Yeah.
exactly, a great show to actually help our children. And because that show
Mhm.
also has a lot of diverse characters in terms of race.
Yes.
And yes, and
Hmm.
it's not very clear who's going to be the bad guy or the good guy.
Hmm. Yes. Yeah. Yeah, I love it. What would you say to a parent of any age who is scared to start bringing up race regularly with their kids because they think either they don't struggle with it and don't need to, or that by bringing it up, they're going to make it a thing that their kids internalize?
Well, let me talk about the parents for children like mine, right? The parents who maybe have Black and brown children, global majority children, and my children were raised primarily in Silicon Valley, where they were very much a numerical minority.
Yeah.
And it could be easy to imagine that our children are not struggling with it. But
Mm-hmm.
what I've discovered and what some of the research shows is that when children don't have these conversations and help them understand that racism is a thing, that it exists, that they might be judged by other people, not based on their merit, but based on the color of their skin, their gender, these characteristics, then they make sense of any harm that they experience, any impact they experience by saying, I'm bad, I'm the problem, because there are not enough people around them to show them otherwise. And so even though your child might not be explicitly stating, I'm having a problem because someone is being racist, they're not saying it because you haven't given them the language. And
Yeah.
so what they're doing instead is drawing the conclusions that I'm having a problem because I'm a bad person. And
Yeah.
so help your children have the wider context to make sense of some of the impacts that they might experience. It's much more protective for their self-esteem and their sense of self.
And
Absolutely.
I think for parents who are white, it's really important to lean into. I just want to acknowledge people being afraid of not knowing what to say and saying. But the most important thing is the parents' internal values, and that the parent talks about them. Like for us in this family, it's so important that everybody counts. That we take a look at who's not getting what they need, that we acknowledge that in our history, people have really not gotten what they needed. And that, sometimes it's still happening, and we need to know about it, we need to think about it, we need to talk about it, because it goes against our family's values that things are inequitable. These kinds of conversations where the parent reveals their heart and their love are really important conversations. And when you're grounded in that, you're not going to say anything wrong. And if you do, it doesn't matter, because you're grounding into those values, and the kids are going to pick up on those values.
And if you don't talk about your values again, and they don't have the experience with you where they are picking up on your values, they will pick up on the values that they are exposed to, right?
Exactly.
And so for somebody who's white, so much of what happens for people who are of the global majority is not known, because whiteness is so centered. Another really important piece about it for parents who are white is to learn as much as they can about what's going on. And then Roxy's first book, How to Have Anti-Racist Conversations, also has really great modeling for like all of us getting out into the world and making sure we have conversations where our children can hear us having conversations.
Absolutely. And, that also helps give us the language to use, like you were saying, in front of our children, but also in protection of our children as well, right? Because
other children when we're bystanders to
yes, absolutely. I wish that somebody had brought me along on that journey and said, okay, this is what you need to know. And I wish that there had been literature and resources available that were given to me in high school. Like, we should be giving our high school kids these resources to learn about, to do the self-work, to learn about racism and biases and different things. Because like we mentioned at the beginning, I think, Sarah, it was you who brought up that our kids want to do this work especially in this generation. They want to make more equitable spaces, and giving them the tools to do that earlier helps us all. It helps all of us, right? Can you go, so we're talking a little bit about dialoguing. Can you go through, in the workbook, there is a map of open dialogue. And I know you could probably teach an 8-hour course on the map of dialogue, but could you guys just kind of give us just a basic rundown of what positive open dialogue looks like?
So the framework that I created, the Authentic Dialogue Framework, it has a number of steps, right?
Yes.
So the first part is, and this is a part that I think Sarah brings such beautiful, beautiful work in, is really being able to hold ourselves with compassion, to understand what's happening when we experience either harm, or when we're witnessing, or when we discover that we've created it, that we've been the agent of harm. And do you want to add a little bit there, Sarah, about this first step?
I'm loving that you're just bringing it out. Yeah, what the heck do we do?
And so then once I know that, and this is a part that we often jump into without slowing down. And a really important part of this process is understanding, what is it that I want to accomplish? What's important to me here? So do I actually want to stop harm that's happening? Do I just want to say, hey, whatever's happening needs to stop, but I don't actually want to engage? Do I want to be heard about the experience that I'm having? Or do I want to have a shared dialogue so that I can understand what's going on for you and why you're doing this? And you can understand what's going on for me, maybe why I'm making the choices I'm making. Sometimes, and this might be something that parents might be holding for their children, it might be that, you know, you've talked about having multiracial children and your child is having some impact in school. And so the focus of your dialogue might be, how can I support my child in making sense of what's happening and healing some of the wounds that they're experiencing? And so this last part, and this is a dialogue that we often jump to because we have this fierce protective instinct, is to jump to solution. We want to have a dialogue that's around, what do you do? And we often even override our children's own sense of, you know, we were talking with another person who said she had a child from Guatemala and she would want to jump in and fix everything for her child. And her child would say, Mom, pump the brakes. I want to have choice. I need to be empowered in knowing, do I want to take care of this myself, or do I need you to help me figure out a solution? So that dialogue for solution is the last part. So in the book, I talk about the inner work that we do, figuring out how we want to approach this, and then the making the choice about which dialogue we want to have, and then choosing between a dialogue to be heard, a dialogue for mutual understanding, a dialogue for healing, or a dialogue for solution.
Let's talk for a second about, and I love that explanation. Let's talk for a second about, what if your child is experiencing bullying, racial bullying? What are some ways that you can bring healing into that situation, especially if the other parties are not interested in having an open dialogue?
The most important and effective thing for bullying is a systemic response. So while we're supporting our children emotionally, while we're having any kind of conversation with the teacher, we should also be thinking about talking with the principal, talking with the school district, and anti-bullying efforts in from the top down. That's a lot for a parent to take on. They might not be able to, but it is the most important thing. So perhaps even finding a coalition of other parents who are willing to address this,
I like
and
that.
pressure for it is really key. And bringing clear witnessing to school boards is an important piece of the process. Because the bullying, when they look at bullying, you know, it doesn't start with kids. It starts with the adults in the system.
Absolutely.
And how they're responding. See, where do you go with this one?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I'm all for doing things that support our children. But if I keep working with you on making sense of what's happening, but it keeps happening to you, it's like I'm trying to put out a fire that just keeps getting reignited. So take care of the fire first, take care of the harm, prevent the harm, and then work with your child on making sense of what's happening. Knowing, are you attributing this to some flaw in yourself, or do you have that systemic lens to understand that this is not about you? This is
Yeah.
about a child, and not demonizing the other child, right? This is a
Yeah.
child who is struggling and who has these really harmful ways of dealing with their pain. And it's not okay that they're doing this to you. But it
Yeah.
isn't about you, it's about them dealing with their pain. So let's
Mhm.
figure out how we can protect you in this
Mhm.
moment while they get the help that they need. So
Yeah.
helping your child have places, make sure that it's okay for them to talk to you about it.
Mhm.
As I mentioned before, like one of the things I remember hearing children say, and it was so heartbreaking, was
Mhm.
they said, I'll never tell my parents about this because I'm worried about what they'll do, right?
Mm.
So if you jump in with this kind of like scorched earth response, know
Yeah.
that your child might be trying to protect you by not
Yeah.
telling you about it because they don't want you to get in trouble. They don't want you
Yeah.
to attack the other family or attack the other parents, right?
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
so you need to be open and, to the degree possible, let yourself be guided by what your child needs.
Mhm.
Sometimes I've had children say, I don't want you to do anything,
Mhm.
not because that's what they want, but because they're scared. And so
Mm.
helping them understand, I get that you're scared and it makes sense that you're scared. Let's talk
Yes.
about that. And if we don't do anything, it's going to continue. So
Mhm.
I want to find ways that we can move forward to stop this so that you
Mhm.
don't have to be scared anymore. So it's not
Mhm.
just like being guided completely by the child who says, don't do anything at all, but making sure you understand
Mhm.
what it is that they're responding to when they say, don't do
Mhm.
anything or to take this action.
Yeah. And, we were talking about preschoolers earlier, but this gets so much more nuanced and complicated as you move on with middle and high school. And you have bullying that occurs on different levels as well, right? Because now we have social media and different schools have different policies about when you do have a middle school or high schooler and you do escalate this to school board and to other things. How would you suggest a parent start talking? What do you think the most effective way to start a anti-racist conversation at a more corporate or school level is for a parent whose kiddo is experiencing bullying?
So some of the things that are really important
Mm-hmm.
is to first trust your child. I want to be super clear about this. If my child
Mm-hmm.
says I'm being bullied, trust your child. And
Yeah.
at the same time, be aware that you know one slice of what's
Mm-hmm.
happening. So I always lead with curiosity
Mm-hmm.
and a clear request. My curiosity is, are you aware that this is happening, that this is what my child is saying is happening in school? Is there
Mm-hmm.
more information you can tell me about what's going on?
Mm-hmm.
And then from that, it's here's what I would like to see happen. And maybe
Yeah.
we can work together to figure out how can we make sure that this stops, that my child
Mm-hmm.
is not having this impact.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes we're tempted to go in saying, you're bad, you're making this happening, you're letting this
Mm-hmm.
happen. And that everyone just shuts down. Everyone goes into
Yeah.
defensive protective mode.
Defense. Yeah.
But if I'm leading with curiosity and clarity around my
Mm-hmm.
goal is to make sure that no child, my child or
Mm-hmm.
any other child is experiencing harm. And I
Yes.
want to work with you to make sure that this is
Mm-hmm.
true. People are a lot more open.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
also bringing this research, which is amazing research about how systems it needs to happen systemically, that's what really is effective to reduce bullying. I
Mm-hmm.
don't think, I think there's, I mean, people on school boards are fabulous.
Mm-hmm.
I have family members on school boards and I'm so grateful to them and
Mm-hmm.
like to their campaigns. And I'm like, yes, gosh, thank you. But they aren't specialists in curriculum. They
Yeah.
aren't specialists in problem solving.
No.
They aren't specialists in educational statistics.
Yeah.
So one of the things that parents can do is to bring, like, here's the kind of program that really has had an effect for bullying,
Mm-hmm.
and and that those kinds of like taking a little bit of responsibility for education, even when it's a little bit hard. It's fairly easy these days to Google research
Mm-hmm.
and to come up with some good papers and bring them
Yeah.
forward. Because that's another thing that just kind of is a little bit of a suit of armor for
Mm-hmm.
parents going
No,
into
I love that. Yeah, to find statistics for the people who do statistics and bring it up that way. Yeah,
it
that's a great
also
addition to that.
depersonalizes it.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to build on something Sarah said earlier about finding
Mm-hmm.
a coalition. If your child is being
Yeah.
bullied, there's a good chance that other people are being bullied
Mm.
and
Yeah.
that other families know that it's happening and are
Mhm.
unhappy about it, even if their
Mhm.
child is not being targeted. And so we often feel alone in these situations. The child feels alone, the parent
Yeah.
feels alone, and we're not. We're not
Yeah.
alone. And so we have other families, like I mentioned, but there are
Mhm.
also organizations
Mhm.
who exist to help
Mhm.
protect our children, to help bring equity into the schools.
Yeah. I love that too, because it's isolating. It's very isolating. So it's important to figure out, who's on your side and that you're not alone. Yeah. Bringing that into that. Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, especially in light of book bans. I'm in Texas. So we have not experienced quite as much of that as teachers in Florida have. But there's been a fair amount, and it's absolutely unnecessary. But so in light of these book bans, how can we help our kids to find racial mirrors? And then how can we speak to other adults about our children's rights to have racial mirrors, and then also to experience things outside of their own race?
To some degree, I just want to catch anybody who's listening, who's been dismayed and worried about the book bans, and
Mm-hmm.
just to acknowledge, the degree to which a open and free access to education and books has been of huge importance for
Mm-hmm.
so many people in the United States and coming up and becoming educated. And so just want to bow to any grief or worry that's a part of the picture right now. And I love it that you've asked the question, because it's one of the things that I worry about for representation in libraries.
Mm-hmm.
Child. And so there are a couple of initiatives
Mm-hmm.
where people are getting free books out to families.
Mm-hmm.
That's one way to begin to address it, is to like look at what you've got in your own home library, just as you were mentioning about
Mm-hmm.
looking at your children's books and taking a bit of an inventory. And because in many homes people don't think about books,
Mm-hmm.
but they are so helpful, especially as
Mm-hmm.
you said, with representation and mirrors. Roxy, where do you go on this?
Again, echoing everything that y'all are saying about the importance of having
Mm-hmm.
those mirrors for people of many different identities to see
Mm-hmm.
themselves. And there's something about what you said, Sarah, about making sure that we're going to the school board meetings, making sure
Mm-hmm.
that we are making our voices, the voices that are advocating for this, heard, because
Mm-hmm.
we exist, we are there, we want this.
Mm-hmm.
The other piece is to just organize things within yourself. So if you live in a community where they're banning books or moving things from the shelves in the
Mm-hmm.
libraries, maybe you can have a few books, maybe another family has a few books. You do a lending library, you do an exchange. You
Mm-hmm.
find grassroots ways to make sure that the materials get to the families and the folks who need them.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I also love, love, love the idea of inviting in people who in some ways have stature in the field. So if there's an
Mm-hmm.
author that you love, reach out to that author and say, my community isn't doing, has banned your book and we love it.
Mm-hmm.
And we want to make sure other kids have access to it.
Mm-hmm.
Are you willing to do a Zoom reading for us, right? Are
Yeah.
you willing to do something to engage with us that also helps bring almost like national attention to
Mm-hmm.
what's happening? And for that
Yeah.
author, it's like so beautiful to be like, oh, wow, you want my book that much? Of course I
Mm-hmm.
want to support this because I want my books to be accessible. And it
Yes.
also helps to raise awareness in the community, both
Mm-hmm.
locally and at large, that this is happening and the
Mm-hmm.
impact it's happening. The
And
third thing I would say, oh,
no, go ahead. The third thing.
is when you're talking to folks who don't want the books, right? The folks who are
Yeah.
saying, let's ban the books. It's really important to, and it's a very fine line to walk. I focus on the harm, I focus on needs. I want my child to see themselves reflected in books.
Mm-hmm.
And whether or not you agree that
Yeah.
that's important,
Mm-hmm.
you get to choose what you do with your child. You get to
Mm-hmm.
choose that. And I want the same freedom to choose for my child.
Yeah.
Right. And
Yeah.
so really focusing on and reclaiming the dialogue about choice. Because
Mm-hmm.
when you say that I'm holding choice for my rights as a parent by
Yeah.
taking away your choice, that's a problem. You
Yeah.
get to choose not to go in the library and pick up that book. But
Mm-hmm.
if it's not in the library at all, I don't get to choose to go and
Mm-hmm.
have access to it. So really reclaiming some of that dialogue and
Mm-hmm.
inviting folks, take care of your family the way that you need to.
Mm-hmm.
I need also want the same freedom for my own.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely.
And I love it that you brought up Zoom readings.
Mm-hmm.
Because there are these wonderful Zoom readings of
Mm-hmm.
kids and things that are recorded and available, things on YouTube. I mean, there
Mm-hmm.
are ways to get free resources for the family
Mm-hmm.
that can help to counteract
Mm-hmm.
the local initiatives that are closing libraries, even closing.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely.
And
And
can I
reiterating the importance of libraries too.
yeah. I want to add one more thing about this.
Mm-hmm.
We've been talking a lot about, at least in this last minute or so, about the importance of like online access.
Mm-hmm.
And I also want to acknowledge the kids and families that are impacted by this. Some of them don't have online access. They live in
Yes.
communities that will never hear this podcast, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I often have parents with privilege, either class privilege or racial
Mm-hmm.
privilege, saying, what can I do to help? And this is one of the things you can do to help. You
Mm-hmm.
can also advocate for the structures that help to provide access, that help
Mm-hmm.
to mitigate some of the kind of physical restrictions that are happening by ensuring
Mm-hmm.
that different families have access. You can also help say, you know what? We have a computer where we're going to do this. We're going to invite families in our school to say, come over to our house. We're going to host a viewing of this online
Mm-hmm.
resource so that people who don't have access to it not only get that access, but my children also now get to interact with
Mm-hmm.
and experience folks on equal terms. So there's
Mm-hmm.
so many things that we can do to show up and support this, even if
Mm-hmm.
we're not directly impacted.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Can y'all share a little bit about why mirrors are so important for kids?
Well, when we see someone who looks like us doing
Mm-hmm.
or being a character, being the main character,
Mm-hmm.
we get to be invited into being the main character of our own lives
Mm-hmm.
and to be explorers or scientists or mathematicians or
Mm-hmm.
just so many ways in which inspiration and hope and possibility are given birth to in these
Mm-hmm.
And I remember there's this really great video on YouTube.
Mm-hmm.
And in the video, there's a classroom, and the children in the classroom are asked to draw a picture of a firefighter, a surgeon, a pilot, like these careers. And in the classroom, I think the video concludes that
Mm-hmm.
127 pictures were drawn, and maybe 5 of them were women. And
Wow.
so then they brought in women in all of these roles. And the first response, one of the responses was, "Oh, they're in costume." And
Mm-hmm.
then they had the children interact with these women in these roles. So this is like a living mirror. And I am sure that after this, some of the children started seeing it was possible for them to
Mm-hmm.
become the female firefighter, the female surgeon, the female pilot, right? So it's so
Yeah.
important to see people saying, yes, there's so much more out there. There's so much possibilities in
Yes.
what we can become.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. I'll add to that. My little girl was interested in space, and we've already had several conversations about how there's a lot of boys in space and space stuff, and a lot of space stuff has boys on it. But there are so many mirrors for her now that there weren't when I was growing up. And I'm so grateful for that. One of the things that was so neat to experience with her was the International Space Station does a reading program on YouTube. And so there was a female astronaut reading a book, floating around in space. And my daughter her mind was blown, and she loved it so much, and she's watched it so many times. And And now she's like, I want to be the first female on Mars. Like, I want to do this.
Yes.
But I think it was largely because of those mirrors. And then I'll speak to the opposite end of that as well. My babies all have will always and have multiple mommies and daddies. And she has already been told on the playground that it's not okay to have two mommies, or it's not okay to have two daddies, right? And family makeups are so different for everyone. There are 100 reasons you could have two moms, right? Or kids living with grandparents or uncles and aunts, and just a myriad of other things. And so it's so important for us to have that diversity for other kids to experience proximity to different people and different family makeups and different families, and different people, in safe ways through books and through these mirrors that we provide for them, so that we can experience it with them and talk with them about these things, so that they aren't unintentionally causing harm because of what they've internalized from us.
Yes.
Causing or carrying an
Yeah, absolutely.
Sometimes I'll just quickly say, I sometimes think of these mirrors as almost like inoculations. We give them their vaccines to prevent like bad germs coming in. But these mirrors can also be the vaccine that prevents bad ideas from coming in. It's like when that idea comes, there's already something that says, wait a second, that makes no sense. I've seen it in this book. And then it becomes less likely to stick.
Yes, I love that idea. Can you guys talk a little bit, let's go back and talk about self-awareness. And I love how y'all talk about negative peace in particular. Can you spend a minute just talking to us about that?
Yes. So, and I think this is so important for families. Negative peace is when we think that because everything seems calm, no one is complaining, that everything's okay. And usually what negative peace means is that if I'm the child who's experiencing bullying and I don't talk about it, you're going to think everything's just fine, but it's at my cost. I'm paying the price for this, for your comfort. Positive peace says that true peace happens when we're talking about the difficult things, that it might feel uncomfortable, it might feel challenging, but we're actually creating the conditions where well-being happens when everyone is okay. Not just you're okay because I'm being silent, but we're all being okay. And so when we're thinking about our family situations, our school situations, the communities we live in, we want to support positive peace, communities where every person, every child knows that your well-being matters. And our community is not okay if you're not okay. If any child, if any member of our community is not okay.
Yeah. I love that. Sarah, do you have anything to add to that? No? Okay.
What Roxy said, she's
that's great. How, bouncing off of that, what are some ways we can encourage our kids to be comfortable in their own skin and to be able to challenge the biases around them?
I think it's really important to first model it for them. When they see us doing it, when they watch us intervene when someone's making the comment to the waitress at the store, if they watch us gather in and support the child who's being bullied at the playground, then they get the modeling that they need to think, oh, that's how you do it. That's the language that you use. Or that if I'm getting pushback, this is how I take care of myself in the moment when people start to turn and attack me. So it's really, really start off by modeling it for them. That's a big tip. Another big tip, and this is especially helpful as children get older, they have those moments when I saw something happen and I didn't say or do anything. And now I'm feeling a little bit bad about myself. And so helping them understand that this is a developmental journey, that it might be hard for you to say something now, but it was hard for me too. And we could learn. We could learn together. Let's role play together what you might say the next time this happens.
I love that idea.
Yeah, showing them a path that I wasn't, just because I'm the adult doing this now and it looks great, this is not where I started.
Yeah.
And it's not where you're going to start, but you will get here.
Yeah.
Let's support each other in doing it.
That role playing is just a great parenting tip in general. Like, yeah. Yeah. Just to be able to do that. Okay, we're going to go ahead and wrap up. We are running out of time. I have so much more that I could talk to you guys about, and I know that you could teach just hours on the subject. But I wanted to ask you, what are some of, first of all, what are your current projects that you're working on, and how can people find you?
Well, I'll start with the easy part. How can you find me? You can go to the website that we created for our books, antiracistconversations.com.
Okay.
And there you'll
Perfect.
get lots of information about the books and about our new podcasts. So that is one of our new projects, is we have this amazing podcast where we interview and talk with people who are doing innovative and in some ways unexpected work to address racism. So a lot of folks are familiar with being an activist, but we're also talking to teachers, we're talking to writers, artists, singers, musicians, a whole host of people who are each showing up in, like, here's another model of how we can take action to create an anti-racist society. So that's a project that's really consuming a lot of time and is so dear to my heart.
That's wonderful. We will link that below.
And then Roxy has a regular website also, roxannemanning.com, and an amazing newsletter where she discusses the kinds of questions that you've been asking us with beautiful examples and model role plays. That I love getting Roxy's newsletter. So that's
awesome. Yeah, those scripts are so helpful for parents.
Yeah. And then if you're interested in the neuroscience of self-compassion and a bit of a systemic lens, my website, sarahpeyton.com, is also a place to take a look.
Awesome. We will link.
And you also have that amazing newsletter with lots of innovative tips and even support guided meditations, a whole bunch of things that help people to take that knowledge and apply it.
That's fantastic. We have such a knowledge overload, right? And so it's so important to be able to take a minute and to be able to apply it and internalize. That's fantastic. Yeah. That's fantastic.
It's important to have a news and information diet, and it's important to have this kind of thing on it.
Yeah. Okay, and this last question is something we ask everyone. What is a show or a book that you have binged recently that you just love?
You go first.
Well,
actually, go on.
I just love this African author who does Afro science fiction. I just love her, and her name is, if I am saying it correctly, her name is Nnedi Okorafor, and she writes a series called Binti. I just love it. It's magic.
Yes,
that's awesome.
That's a great recommendation. And then what I just literally just binged was Charlie Holmberg's series, the Paper Magician series. And it's a great young adult series, but it also, like, one of the things I loved about it, it has this system of magic, and one of the forms of magic is origami. And it's like, thinking about origami as a form of magic. It was so fun. Yeah. So her first book in that series is The Paper Magician. Great series.
Awesome. We will link that too. Well, thank you guys so much for joining us today. We will link all of the information as well as those book suggestions below on the YouTube and on the blog. I'm Sarah from Down the Hobbit Hole blog. Thanks for checking this out, and we hope that this helps you have some engaging and meaningful conversations with your kids. Thanks. Have a good day.